Event Viewer. In this nugget, we talk about Event Viewer. We start off by just looking at the various event logs that are available, the security event log, the application, and the system event logs, as well as some others that are available. And then, once we look at the event logs, we'll see some examples of various types of errors, warnings, and informational messages. We'll also look at the event log properties. Each one of the event logs can have different properties if you want, so that you can configure how many megabytes of storage is useful for a specific log, when it's overwritten, and things of this nature. We'll also talk about how to archive the event logs, because sometimes you need long-term storage for those so that you can have a historical backup of what's been going on in your events. And then we'll talk about group policy, which is another way of adjusting the event log properties. We'll also look at command line utilities that you can use in conjunction with the event viewer and with events that are registered in the system, as well as finally concluding with task manager and how you can kind of get an overall picture of current health of your existing system. I recall that in my grade school years, I and my sisters grew up in a little town called Evergreen, Colorado, which is a few miles west of Denver, and it's up in the mountains there. And my dad would always tell us after we got home from school not to eat out of the cookie jar because he didn't want it to spoil our dinner. Well, one day my sisters and I just couldn't resist, and we ate Oreo cookies out of that cookie jar anyway, which were my favorite. Well, when my dad got home, he asked us if we'd eaten out of the cookie jar, to which we all answered, of course innocently, with bright and shining faces, "No, Dad, of course we wouldn't do that." At which point my dad disciplined us quite accordingly, and I promise you this, the disciplinarian that my dad was, we never ate out of that cookie jar when we weren't supposed to again. Later on we asked him, "Dad, how did you know we'd eaten out of that cookie jar?" To which he pointed out a very indicting trail of cookie crumbs. Well, as a systems administrator administering modern Windows computers, we need to be able to also track those cookie crumbs so that we can see the indicting evidence of things like a potential security breach or an attempted security breach, or to identify applications that are causing the system to slow down because of a memory leak, for example. Or we want to try to find out which services are not starting up properly and causing our services not to run properly. And we can do a lot of that through three key tools. And one of them is Event Viewer, the other one's Task Manager, and the third one would be System Monitor, which is also known as Performance Monitor or PerfMon. In this nugget, we'll be talking about Event Viewer and Task Manager. In the next nugget, we'll be talking about System Monitor. Now, you can access the Event Viewer through a couple of different ways. Number one, you can go to a Start Run, and you see that I've typed in at a previous time, Event Viewer, just like I've got it right there, .msc. And we press OK here, click OK, and we see that it opens up just the Event Viewer. You can also see the same Event Viewer if you go to Computer Management by right-clicking my computer and choosing Manage. Now, on any typical Windows system, you'll see three kinds of log files here. One of those will be Application, the other one would be Security, and the third one would be System. These all appear in any current operating system from Microsoft. The other ones that you won't see on every system will be things like Directory Service, which will appear on domain controllers because we, of course, have a directory here. We'll also have DNS Server, which, of course, appears on DNS servers, and we'll also have the File Replication Service. This also appears on domain controllers, and it's necessary because FRS, or File Replication Service, will copy things such as group policies and other system files back and forth between your domain controllers. And I called them files because as you see that I've opened up Windows Explorer here to go to the Windows System 32 config folder, these event logs actually appear as files in this location. The application event log, you can make sense of what these all are. These .evt extensions, each one of those are the event log files for DNS, NTDS, which would be our NT Directory Service, File Replication Service, NTFRS, Security Event Log, System Event Log. So you can see that these are all actually files that appear, and you see that they also have varying sizes. We'll be looking a little while here about how we can adjust those sizes and how to configure that on a group basis if we want for a group policy object. Now let's take a look at what these kind of event logs do. First of all, the application event log is kind of at the mercy of whoever the programmers are for your applications. A lot of the applications are actually Microsoft applications that Microsoft has designed to log to this event log in case there's a problem, or it just will log other things such as just general information saying that an application has started. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of the examples here. For example, you might get just information here saying, for example, with Norton's antivirus, it has successfully downloaded an updated virus definition file. Okay, good. See, that's just a blue eye there on a white background. That's just information, nothing to be concerned about. There's also a warning. Here we're just getting a warning that's a little ambiguous. Actually, most of these are the same here, so let's just pick one out of the middle here. Here it's telling me that I've got a problem with the volume shadow copy service, and it's just giving me a warning that tells me something. What in the world could that be? Well, if it doesn't make any sense to you, you see down here it says bytes. Well, if it doesn't make any sense to you, go to Words, assuming that they'll put it into plain English for you, right? Well, maybe not. So you see, this information down here is really mostly useful if you need to send this information to an application developer or to technical support for an application that's not functioning properly. And many times, this is actually just innocuous information that doesn't really hurt anything. It's just something that the developers think you might want to know about just in case. And having scrolled further down here, let's look at some other kind of warnings. For example, my application here, Norton Antivirus, was having a little trouble with some files, as you can see with all of these warning items. Again, they're not red exclamation points or anything like that, or red X's that designate a serious problem. So if I double-click on this, what does it tell me? The scan could not open my ntds.dit file. That's the NT Directory Service Directory Information Tree file, and that actually is the file that stores all my Active Directory information. It's probably because the system protected it and would not allow the application to open it. Maybe that will alarm you, maybe it won't. That's just other information that you can look at in this and determine whether or not it is going to cause a problem. And then you can also sort these, of course, according to the column up here. You just click on whichever column is necessary, and you can sort by date, for example, which actually also sorts according to time as a subset of that. You can sort on type, so that you can see, for example, just the informational messages first. And if you want to see the warning messages, then those will then float up to the top, or the errors, if you want to see those as well. And then, of course, sometimes these will be fairly obvious as to what the problem is. Other times, as I might have mentioned earlier, they're a little ambiguous and you really don't know what the problem was. This one, if I recall, this one's not actually too bad. If I double-click on it, this one will tell us that, well, I was doing this when I was trying to install the Windows support tools, and I'd already had another installation in progress at the time, and MSI packages don't allow you to install two simultaneous MSI installations at once. So, that's all it told me. It also gave me a pop-up on the screen, if I remember correctly, giving me the same information. So this is a good way to see all the three different types of errors that you can get. You can get these red X or these red field with white X error messages. You can get warnings, and you can get information. And each one of those types of errors or information or warning messages will appear in all of these logs. And for sake of the experience of it, let's just go ahead and look at a couple of other warnings or error messages. For example, here in the system event log, we see that we have a source from the Key Distribution Center, or KDC, that you see there. By the way, the source identifies which service, application, or security log or security event is generating the event. And then it gives you various categories as well if there's one that applies. Now, the warning in this case for the Key Distribution Center applies to the fact that in a previous series that I had done, I had installed smart cards which require a Key Distribution Center to generate certificates that you can put on smart cards. Well, then when I started this series that you're listening to right now, I didn't need my KDC anymore, so I tore it down. But now it's giving me a warning message that we have a certificate installed on this system, but it can't validate that certificate because my KDC is down and it's no longer available anymore. And sometimes it does give you useful information. If I'm having trouble with smart cards and I really did need this, then of course that might be the solution. Oh, that's why I can't seem to log on with my smart card. It gives me the message right there. So sometimes this information can be useful in description. Also, let me point out that I kind of talked about this earlier. In bytes and words, that's actually D-words that appears down here. And these are information that's, again, only useful for developers or somebody that will be able to read this kind of data. For a general administration, we won't be able to read it. But here we also see this link. And this is kind of handy. You can click on this, and at times, once you click on it, it will send information to Microsoft, which it shows a part of it right here for you. And then you can go ahead and say yes to send this information to Microsoft. And then if they have a registered problem of this same type, it'll actually pop up in this, and it will show you, yes, we do have a record of this kind of problem. Here's some more information about how you can resolve this issue. Much of the time, also, you get what I've just seen right here. We're sorry, we don't have any other information on this. Thank you very much, though. So sometimes you do get this one as well. But, boy, those informational articles or links that will appear in the Help and Support Center can at times be very useful in resolving a problem. Now, having skipped around here a little bit, I just went down to another one that's just an information-only message. And then just FYI, you saw that we were working with quotas way early in our series here when we were talking about hard disks. And when you establish a quota on a disk, it gives you the message that you see down here, that it's just basically rebuilt user disk quota information. If you go up one, we see that, again, it has started rebuilding the user disk quota information. And then what I really wanted to show you was notification of when a user exceeds their quota. And here we have, in this case, it's still information. I thought they kind of should make it a warning because someone has, reached a quota limit on their volume. But this is just the fact that these events do appear in the system event log, so that if a user does exceed their quota, they will appear if you check that box. And of course, just to review, because this is going back a few nuggets here, if we go back to our quota tab, we notice that we do have the checkbox for log event when a user exceeds their quota limit, log event when a user exceeds their warning level. And then going to the quota entries over here, we see that indeed Phoenix User 01 is above the limit for their quota, and that's why we have this event log that I just showed you. Now let me also point out that in addition to the up and down buttons, which help you to navigate various events just up and down like this, you can also click this button, which copies whatever is in this event into the clipboard, and that allows you to go to, well, let's just say Notepad in this case, and paste that information in. And that way I could paste it in there and save it as a file for someone else to look at, or email it to somebody if I wanted to do that as well. Now then, returning to the system event log, we see that we have another informational message from the printing. And with this one, it just identifies, and I just wanted to let you know, that anytime you print to a print server, it will track through event logs what has taken place. It is printed document to untitled. It's a Notepad document. It was owned by me, the trainer, and it was printed on my HP LaserJet 8100 through that IP port, and that's pretty much it. This is just to let you know that you can use event logs to identify how much a printer is used. That's just one of the ways you can use this. And then if we go up here, we see that another interesting message appears. It says that it was deleted. Well, does that mean that the print job didn't complete successfully? No, actually, that means it did complete successfully, because the printer is actually the print server, and the print queue is what keeps track of the print job and processes the print job. Once that job is physically complete on the physical printer, then it deletes the print job from the print queue on the print server, and that's exactly what this is referring to. Now let's go ahead and take a look at another one. Here we have an error. Now this, of course, looks a little bit more serious. It's a general category of, or general source of net logon, which is just very generic. So let's just crack it open and see what we got here. Okay, the dynamic registration of the DNS record, and then it gives us this serial number, this gobbledygook number here in msdcsnuggetlab.com, and that's a CNAME record. You see, what happens is, we talked about CNAME records, by the way, in IIS in a previous section here. Anyway, each domain controller registers a CNAME for this unique identifier, whatever its unique identifier is, with this name. And the reason why it does that is, if I change the name of this domain controller, and I have clients that can't find it by name, they can still find it by this unique identifier. And apparently at the time, this IP address was unavailable for the DNS server, and so it was not able to register it. Now, I know that DNS is working in my case at this point, so that's nothing that I'm going to be alarmed about right now. But if we did have an ongoing problem with this DNS server or something like that, it gives us some user action down here, and this could be very useful information. It tells you what kind of executables you can run to diagnose the problem, some other testing functions that you can use to test everything out. And so in this case, it does give us some useful action that's very informative. Now let's look at another one. Here's another error, NTDS replication. NT is NTDS, or Directory Service Replication, so that's our Active Directory replication that was going on there. And apparently it couldn't locate this directory partition of cbtnuggets.com. That's likely because that domain controller has been turned off for a few hours here, because I didn't need it for this particular series. So that domain controller is not available, and we're not getting replication going back and forth between it. Sometimes also, incidentally, you will find that there are error messages that really don't help you much at all, and you may have to go to other locations or look for other warnings or errors that kind of connect the dots to identify what this error is. For example, in this case, it tells me I had an error, and the extended error debug information, which may be empty, is indeed empty. And it says the event data contains the error. And the event data is this? Okay, so that makes very plain English sense to me, so no problems there. No, a little bit of sarcasm there, but in reality, sometimes, again, this information is not very useful, but you just kind of have to pick your way through the errors and put clues together to identify what could be causing a problem. Now, I mentioned that we will have informational messages, warnings, and errors like we've been looking at. And then the other kind you'll have, which we've already looked at in a previous nugget for NTFS, under security is success audit or failure audit in our security event logs. And also be aware that you can adjust the properties of any one of these logs. You can adjust them all individually if you like on a local computer. So for example, for the security event log, if I right-click and choose properties, and all of the properties for all of these appear exactly the same here, so we don't need to look at each one. But you can see some evident information here, some obvious information, which I won't exhaust. However, you see that you can override events as needed, and you can override events older than 7 days as well, or however many days is necessary, or do not override events, which would be really something you probably wouldn't want to do for a security event log, because you usually want to keep everything in terms of the security event log. If you select this option and it fills up, the event log fills up to its maximum size here at 13 megabytes, then any new events will be discarded and you could miss a potentially threatening security event. Also, if you want to look at only error messages or something like that, you can go to the filter item here, and you can sort for example, just like I say here, only errors or only failure audits. Since we're in the security log, that would be something I might want to see. And then I could just click OK, or I could sort according to that column that we could click up at the top there as well in the background over here. So you can sort for whatever kind of a event source you want to look for, what kind of category you want for if there's more than one to list. Click OK, and now we're seeing that in this entire event log, we're only seeing failure audits for people that didn't log on properly, that had the wrong password, that kind of stuff. And note that I can also connect to another system. For example, right now I'm on the local computer, as you can see in the parentheses there, but I can just right-click here, choose Connect to another computer, and then enter in the name of that other machine, DC-2, for example, and click OK or press Enter, and now I'm looking at the event log for that other system. And then having returned to the local event viewer here, you see that with each one of these event logs, you can right-click on any one of them, and they all work the same in this respect, and then save the log file as one of three formats. To save it in the EBT format means that you'll also be able to retain the binary data portion of the files, which is the part at the bottom that retains information such as the word value or the data value and all that gibberish that doesn't make sense to most administrators, but programmers would be able to make more sense out of. Now, since I'm saving the system one, I'll just save this as system, and save it as an EBT file. You can also save it as a text tab delimited format or a CSV comma delimited format. And those formats might be useful if you want to further manipulate the data in something like, a spreadsheet or something like that. I'll save it as system and click Save. And then if I want to open up one of the files that I've saved previously, I'll just right-click and open log file. It doesn't matter where you right-click. And then I'll select system.ebt in this case, and then specify that it's the log type of system here. Open, and then down in the system event log down here, I see saved system log, and this is all the exact same information that I had in the original system event log. And of course, we want to save and archive the event logs depending on the critical nature of the servers. For example, on almost any server, you want to probably archive and save the security event log. Let me also show you another thing with this. I could clear all events here and absent-mindedly forget to save the event log first. As soon as you choose clear all events, however, it also prompts you saying, do you want to save it before clearing it? Oh, that's right, I do need to save this, don't I? And then you just save it, and there you go. Notice that also once I've saved it and cleared the event log, it also identifies that somebody did clear the event log, and it identifies who it was that cleared it. In this case, the client username was trainer, and that can be useful if you want to keep track of the possibility that somebody might have deleted the event log without saving it, and maybe they're trying to cover their tracks, or maybe have a dishonest administrator or something like that. Now also notice that you can, again, configure each one of these logs by properties by going to each individual one, but then if you go do that on all of your servers, then that gets to be quite a lot of right-clicking and choosing properties and configuring all that stuff manually. So you can also go to a policy for whichever scope of management applies. I just happen to open the default domain policy here, where I've expanded the computer configuration under Windows Settings, Security Settings, and then down here to the event log. And then for this, you can configure whichever items you want, maximum application log size or security or log system log size, and these are all in kilobytes. You can also retain the log, whichever one, for a period of days, as you see here, for a period of days. And then you can specify the retention method for the various logs so that they overwrite or do not clear their events as necessary, and you can see the various options here. Also note that you can prevent the local guest group from accessing any of these logs, which is kind of redundant in the case of the security log, because you have to be an administrator to view the security log anyway. Otherwise, just generic domain users can access the application and system log without any special administrative privileges. However, they cannot clear those logs. Now here I've also gone to the security options where we have another security item to be aware of, and that's this audit setting. Here you can enable this policy setting to shut down the system immediately if it's unable to log security audits. You see, someone could do something like a brute force attack on a domain controller, let's say, and they could just fill up that event log. And then depending on the retention settings for that event log, it could be prevented from logging any additional events. That means that whoever the hacker is could just go wild and do all kinds of security exploits and not have anybody be able to see what they're doing through a log. And that's, of course, extremely insecure, so you could enable this setting. It's the lesser of two evils because, of course, it's going to shut down your system. You don't want it to be unavailable, but on the other hand, it's lesser of an evil than having your system attacked and exploited. Now, before we leave our discussion of event log, let's go ahead and take a look at certain event log command line utilities. Here we have something called event triggers from a command line that when you type it in, you can use it to keep track of certain errors, warnings, or other information. And when, for example, a certain error comes up, you can trigger it to automatically perform some other executable or some script or batch file from the command line that you designate. And then you can also specify, for example, even if it's just a warning, maybe you get a low disk space warning. Well, you can use event triggers to then automatically run the clean manager or clean mgr.exe utility, which is the disk cleanup utility included in current versions of Windows. You can also use event create, and this can be useful because it allows the administrator to enter in an event log that would not have otherwise appeared as a trigger from a security event or an application or a system event or that kind of thing. Instead, this is something that you put in yourself. For example, if we're starting to beta test some software today, then I would put a marker in my event log, and it would just be an event that I custom create saying we started custom testing xyz.exe today. And that would give me a place to keep track of when we started using that software. And then the event query.vbs is a visual basic script that you can run from within cscript, which is the Windows scripting host. And this will allow you to keep track of certain kinds of logs. So for example, I might only want to see application logs, and I might want to only see errors in the application log. And when I see an error, I want it to only put that out into a CSV file or into a table or a list format or something like that. I can also specify it so that it only shows me a certain range of events and things of this nature. Very flexible way of taking a look at specific events, and it's a really good way also to help distill down the thousands of events that are recorded in an event log. Now, in addition to the event viewer, we can also use WMI, or the Windows Management Interface, to do certain kinds of event viewing or event logging. Now, although a discussion of WMI is completely beyond our scope, it is a part of the Microsoft's implementation of the Web-Based Enterprise Management Initiative. And this allows us the ability to create or read or modify certain kinds of management information. WMI can be run one of two ways. Number one, you can run it in interactive mode, which is simply where you go to a command prompt and type WMIC to go to interactive mode. Now it takes me to a WMI command prompt, and I just type in whatever command or whatever function it is that I want to perform from this command prompt. Another thing I could do, if I exit out of this, is to run it from non-interactive mode. Now, first of all, let's discuss why you would want to do one or the other. If you want to run in interactive mode, which is where you see right in this interface, I went to WMIC and pressed enter to go to the WMI command prompt. That's where I'm going to enter in individual commands one at a time. Probably if I'm going to do something like a batch file, however, or some kind of other script, I'm going to need to run it in non-interactive mode. And with this, I'll type WMIC followed by whatever the command is in a batch file. And let me show you an example of that. Now here we see a batch file in non-interactive mode, and although we don't have to memorize all the syntax and the language for WMI, which is a little beyond our scope as I said earlier, it does give you some ideas of what it does. The output of this is going to be on the local C drive, and it's going to be a file called security.htm. We're looking for NT events where it's event type 5, and it's a security log event. When it gets the log file, it's going to identify the source name, the event type, the message, the time it was generated, and then you can ask for other information if there's more to glean from it. And then the format we're asking for is an HTML table. So that's pretty much how this kind of a file will look. And again, this is an example of non-interactive mode. Then I'll just go ahead and close that up. And then I'm going to go down to this WMI output, which is just what I called it, .batch file. I'll put this up on nuggetlab.com for you so you can get a sample of it. And I'll double-click on this. We'll see that it's gone ahead and created this file for us under security.htm. I'll double-click on that. And now we see that WMI, using its syntax there, has put this out in a really neat little output table for us. Makes it a little bit easier to sort through and read. Now you also need to be aware of the system health of a machine, and this could take place over a long-term period where you need to see if its performance is steadily degrading over a period of days or even weeks. On the other hand, sometimes you need just a quick snapshot. If you need long-term analysis, you'll need to use System Monitor, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. In our case, if I'm looking for a snapshot, I'll use Task Manager, which I can get to by right-clicking on the taskbar, and then choosing Task Manager. I can also press Control-Alt-Delete, and again choose the Task Manager button from the resulting interface, or my preferred method is just hold down Control-Shift-Escape at the same time and brings open Windows Task Manager for me here. And then if I have an application running, then you see that it will appear here. For example, Microsoft Excel is there. What I can do with this then is to right-click on it and minimize, maximize, which obviously explain themselves. Switch to that application if I'm having trouble getting to the application because another application is in the foreground or the application is otherwise difficult to access, or bring it to the foreground like you see here. Then I can choose to end the task if necessary, which does just that, or I can go to end the process if it's necessary, and that might be useful if I have difficulty identifying exactly which executable from the Processes tab that actual application is. Well, here I can just right-click and choose Go to Process, and in this case it's pretty evident that it's Excel, that some applications are less obvious. Now once we're in this, we can also show processes from all users, which as I showed you earlier in a previous nugget, is useful if you want to look at other users that are connected by a remote desktop or terminal services. Now, getting back to the actual executable here, again I can end the process here, or end the process tree. What's that about? Well, see, an application will often launch other DLLs or other executables or other threads along with that specific executable by itself. So if I want to close also the other DLLs or other threads that have been spawned, I can choose End the Process Tree. Now, that could cause instability issues with other applications. For example, Excel is a Microsoft Office application, and if I also have Microsoft Word running and I choose End Process Tree, then it will probably close shared DLLs or shared functionality between Excel and Word, and then it could compromise the stability of Word. But on the other hand, it might be necessary to end the process tree if one of those ancillary or those additional spawned threads is causing a problem for the whole system. So you just have to use your judgment on that item, and sometimes it's a necessary sacrifice that has to be made. Then we can also set the priority. So for example, if this were a database, and the vice president of the company calls me and say, hey, when's that report going to be done? You say, oh, in 2 hours. He says, well, you need to get it done in an hour or else we're going to have a big problem. Oops. Then in that case, I'm going to set the priority a little bit higher. So I'll set it to high now, and hopefully it'll finish in time for me. Now also let me point out, let me right-click on this again, let me also point out that when you set the priority to a different level, such as high right here, it does give you a warning because it could change the stability of other applications or the entire system. And you have to say yes if you really want this to take place. But if you have other applications that also need processor time and they could potentially starve because they're not getting enough processor time now that I've increased the priority of this application, then in that case, you might have an issue again. And you again might need to just make a necessary sacrifice for those other apps. Now let me also point out that if this is pretty much the only application to speak of that's even running at all, it doesn't really make any difference if I set the priority high because it's going to get the majority of processor utilization anyway if it's really the only thing that's going on. But if this is really an issue, if it has to compete with other applications. By the way, very seldom, if ever, do you want to go to real-time. This is only a last-ditch effort to try to bring back to life an application that, for example, might be hung because it hasn't been getting enough processor time. Then you might choose real-time, and that would only be the case if it had data open that was unrecoverable if the application were to close, and you're pretty much in a last-ditch effort there because real-time is system time, and that means that you could compete with system resources as well and compromise the operating system stability. Now what's supposed to happen when an application starts is if they follow Microsoft's programming guidelines, it's only supposed to use the normal processor utilization unless they have special requirements that go outside of just normal applications. In any case, if you need to specify that an application always starts up with a higher or lower processor utilization, you can go to a command prompt and start the application, whatever it's called, with a higher processor utilization. And I'm just going to show you the command options for the start command, and you'll see that you type in start along with the path for an application. Then you can specify here to start it with low, normal, high, real-time, above normal, or below normal processor utilization. Another thing just to note here is that you can start it in a separate memory space if it's a 16-bit application. Or you can start it up in shared memory space, which is the default behavior for 16-bit applications. And then I also like to identify how much memory each application requires, which you can see from the Memory Usage tab, as well as the CPU utilization, which if I click on the column for any of these, it sorts them. And it sees that the system idle process is predominant here, which is fine. It means that hardly anything's going on. And then it's very useful if I want to identify an application that's dominating processor utilization. Then on the Performance tab, we can see how much CPU requirement is going on at the time. Currently, we're pretty low again. And then the page file usage shows me how much memory is being paged out of or taken from physical RAM and put into the temporary space known as the page file on the physical hard disk, which is a substitute for my physical memory. I also like the networking tab because it shows me how much network utilization is going on at the current time. In the past, we would have to use other tools to be able to find this, but now we have this easily identifiable here in Windows XP as well as Windows Server 2003, so that when I paste a large file in over here and I start to use the network from a network location here, then we see that my local network connection is using a network utilization of around the 20 percentile, 40 percentile, and so forth. So it gives me an idea of how much network utilization is going on to this server. And then finally, we have the Users tab, which we already looked at in a previous nugget regarding terminal services, where we can connect to, disconnect users, send them messages, all that kind of stuff. In this nugget, we took a look at Event Viewer, and with this we were able to see various types of event logs. You have things such as this system event log, the application and security event logs, as well as certain other ones that might appear on domain controllers or DNS servers. And then we looked at some of the event log properties, and we took a look at how you can adjust the size of the event log when it's overwritten, things of this nature. We also looked at how to save it or to archive it, and as well as how to bring it back open and open it back up again if you want to look at archived event logs. And then we saw that in the group policy, you can configure security event logs, for example, to shut a system down if it gets full. And we also see that you can configure these same event log properties that we looked at earlier in a group policy. Now, certain command line utilities are very useful for Event Viewer, and we took a look at a few of those, as well as getting a snapshot look at your system by using Task Manager. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.